I'm Dean Zaris, founder and CEO of ClearFactr. So what is ClearFactr? ClearFactr is a financial modeling platform purpose-built to enable teams across the enterprise to solve what we call spreadsheet dysfunction. Simply put, this happens accidentally, but always when your firm has too many spreadsheets to count. Our website contains all kinds of information about the types of problems that we solve, but today we're going to dive in for the first of a series of videos showing how our customers do this easily and, as we often say, in record time. ClearFactr is a big product, but today we're going to focus on a few key areas around understanding your models and separating them from limitless amounts of data with very important architectural implications. So let's sign in. This is through AWS Cognito. ClearFactr is completely SaaS based, so nothing to install, nothing to maintain. And I had already signed in before. We use the same credentials. I'm going to move this little thing over to here. There we go. And now we're looking at what's called the dashboard of the product. And simply put, this is home base for all of your models. I've got my customer name or account name up here, ClearFactr Dev, my dev account. There may be thousands of models that are in the company or the enterprise. I have access to 179 of them. And simply put, we could do a whole series of demos just on this screen. And this simply lets you stay organized. So I can look at what we sometimes call the narcissist mode, me, all of my models that have no audience. And otherwise, an important view is the one that shows you how you're engaging with other people around these models. And the engagement, again, you can sort of zero in further on that like this. So I can see that this model, as it says here, has an audience of 4 people. There's the 4th one. And I can see some interesting stuff here besides the name and the fact that they're from different companies. Permissions. I can see that this person has access to the model but hasn't actually looked at it. Permissions, very important thing in ClearFactr, enterprise grade, allowing you to dial in exactly who has access to what and what they can do with it on a per model basis. So this model is read only by default, but we have co-authoring capabilities, so-called cell editor. You can't change the structure of the model, but you can edit the content. Person here, again, read only or the default, and another cell editor. Lastly, we've got a little nod to our scenario capabilities. That will certainly be covered in additional videos. But enough on all this. Let's just open the thing up and take a look. Now, any other model, I should say, would have already opened up. All right, well, that was pretty quick. This one has some special capabilities. So we're going to get a little hint as to what those capabilities are right now by asking the table of contents tool to self-describe this model to us. So this model is intentionally small and, just as it says here, contained on a single tab. But very often, just with this one feature, we can discover all kinds of potentially unnecessary complexity in the model. So I can see that I've got 8 inputs and 129 formula cells and so on. These types up here, these cell type buttons, will actually show us where these things are. So these blue cells, what we call the root cells of the model, that's where the calculations of this model start. And the calculations happen in the green cells over here. So any green cell will have a formula in it, Excel style. So J8 equals H8 minus I8, whatever that is. And suffice to say, if your model can make use of the row names and column headers unique to ClearFactr, then this feature over here will begin to self-describe the model. The formulas automatically re-render themselves in natural language. So now we see that this model has something to do with computing equity, implied equity, meaning the assessment minus the mortgage balance. And I can see a bunch of what look like mortgages associated with addresses and so on, and some cash flows, and I see a bogus NPV over here. So let's drill into what that bogus NPV is all about. I'm going to get rid of the table of contents. So the bogus NPV, where does that come from and where does it lead to? Well, the cell ancestry tool will help us understand that. And I can see that the bogus NPV comes from a strip of cash flows and I guess a discount factor. And discount factor, if we remember, might change the NPV. Sure does. I'll hit undo on that. Back to the NPV. The NPV also controls something called transform A, whatever that is. If I crank up the number of ancestors like this, so now I've got, let's call these the parents, now I've got the grandparents, here are the great-grandparents. So again, implied equity, we learned before, the assessment minus the mortgage balance. This red cell controls these three other transforms, B, C, and D. Where does all this stuff come from? Well, with one more click, I'll get a little hint to that. And now I'm going to click on that and everything else will get sort of reoriented. So something in this cell is bringing in all of the data in the red cell. And if I go back to this, we'll see that in fact, the state of Delaware and the number 10 control this content over here. The state of Delaware is associated with the street address, and the street address is associated with a key value. If I change that key value to something else, like M10, now it will go out to these external data sources. This involves both Databricks and Snowflake. And I will get back new data now coming from the state of New York. So now we're looking at the top 10 assessments in the state of New York, and with a very different NPV value, 13.9 million. By the way, if I want to trace the entire lineage of all this, I can flip the Ancestry tool over to Doppler mode. And now I'll get an even more complete picture on where that yellow cell comes from. And the tool automatically hides the stuff that I don't necessarily need to be concerned with. And it gives me a navigation control over things like this, right? In fact, gets even more interesting if I click on a particular cash flow. So where does this come from? Well, it comes from this implied equity calculation, and that comes from these other things like this. And then over to here, and eventually I'll get to one of those root cells. If I go back home, and I can go down the other chain, if you will, and high school physics jokes, the red thing going away from you, the green thing's coming towards you. So that's the genesis of the Doppler tool name. Anyway, so here we are back at this, this particular cash flow. I'll turn that all off, and I'll just now call out one last cell type. So these cell types blinking right now contain linkages to the external data. They're super easy to define. You don't have to write SQL or anything like that. And suffice to say, you can drop them in anywhere into the model, and they will waterfall to each other as they need to, computing only when they have to. So I've got some over here, for example, and in fact, this gives a little nod as to how much data is not in this spreadsheet. So if I do something like this, it'll tell me about 4.1 million rows of mortgage data not in this spreadsheet. That has massive implications because from the earliest days of Excel, and I can kind of remember that, experienced that, old enough for that. To do anything interesting with a compute model, you had to put the data in the spreadsheet, and that led to all kinds of operational risks and road to ruins, gigantic spreadsheets, data that would get stale and out of date, data that nowadays is trapped in the spreadsheet and can't drive your AI models. So with ClearFactr, we're enabling you to break free of all of that. Leave the data where it has always wanted to be, where your data engineers can leverage it, take care of it, and so on, where it can drive all kinds of other things, and then selectively bring it into the model on the fly, allowing your models to be smaller, easier to understand, and actually more powerful. So with that, I'll bring it to a close. I hope you found this interesting and useful. Please contact us to learn more and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you so much.